Story time about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kind of get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy, and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie, and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me, and my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, like for part 2. Part 2 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, the guy was being super flirty with me, inviting me to the movies when my mom wasn't home and all that stuff. Well, then it led to more than just that. By the way, this guy did not have a job, so he was home with me 24/7. And I was doing online school. So we were in the house by ourselves, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, like I said, it led to more, and we started doing the nasty and stuff. Ew, just, yeah. Well, the one day after we got done doing the nasty in my mom's room, we had fell asleep. And yes, we did not have clothes on. Well, at 2 in the morning, I hear someone pounding on the bedroom door, and my mom worked night shifts. So we get up, he hurries up and gets dressed and tells me to hide under the bed. And he opens the door, and it's my mom's sister. My sister literally lived in the apartment next door. And she was like, oh yeah, neither of you were answering the phone, so she wanted me to check on you guys. Like, where's Elena? And I'm still under the bed naked, like for part 3. Part 3 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, I'm laying under the bed, no clothes on. She asks where I am. And he's like, oh, she should be in her room. So he goes looking for me everywhere with her. And he's like, oh, well, maybe she's outside on the patio. And I don't know why the hell my mom's sister had a key to our apartment anyways. But she's still looking for me in the apartment, and she looks under the fucking bed. And at first she's like, oh my god, what did he do to you? And I'm trying to tell her nothing, like I made that decision on my own. So she calls my mom right away. My mom comes home, she's screaming at me, and she kicks me out. So I go to my grandma's house, and I told my grandma what happened. And my grandma calls her, and she's like, it's not her fault that you gave her daddy issues. And I'm like, bruh, what the fuck? Child, anyways. So then she goes on Facebook and starts posting about how I'm a whore and a slut and how, like, it isn't her boyfriend's fault at all. So now I live.
Story time about when my mom caught me doing it with my best friend.
I was 16 at the time, and there was this new boy that moved in across the street from us. He was super cute, and I noticed him right away. My parents were super strict. I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend or even any guy friends, and I knew right away that I wanted to at least become this guy's friend because he was so cute. So one day I told my mom, hey, why don't we take cookies or something to welcome the new neighbors in town? And my mom was like, that's a great idea. So we end up going over and we meet them. They're really nice. And the cute boy comes downstairs and he tells his mom he's going to go to Bible study. Well, when we get home, I tell my mom, hey, you know what? Maybe I should join a Bible study group too. And my mom was like, great idea. She even told me to go ask him about it since he had mentioned it. One day he's mowing the lawn, so I decided to go talk to him and ask him about the Bible study group. He actually ended up taking me there that same day, and we had a fun class. Over the next few weeks, we became really, really good friends. Best friends. We told each other everything. But there was always attraction between. Part 2. So my neighbor, I'll call him Curtis, we're really good friends at this point, but we were always attracted to each other, but because we were in Bible study together and our parents were very religious, we kind of tried to stay away from anything. One day, we're in my house chilling in my room because I knew my mom wouldn't be home for a while, so I told him to just come upstairs. We ended up eating Pop-Tarts and watching a Netflix show. The whole time I was mustering the courage to tell him that I really liked him because I really felt that I wanted to be honest with him instead of just lying to him, and the whole reason why I even got into the Bible study group was to be with him, or at least spend time with him. So finally, I just blurted it out. I said, I like you, and I like you like a lot. He just stares at me blankly. He doesn't know what to say, and I could tell that he was kind of nervous. So I said, do you like me too? He said, yes, you know that I do. And then we started making out. This was the first time I'd ever been kissed, and it was the first time I'd ever had a boy in my room by myself. I kept thinking my mom could come home at any moment, so I told him that he should go home. Suddenly, we're on my bed, and we're doing things that I'd never done before. Suddenly, my door swings open, and guess who it is? My mom. Part 3. So my mom swings the door open, and she sees us on my bed doing stuff. Of course, I'm mortified. I'm super embarrassed. I'm also embarrassed because I know how she's going to react in front of him. My mom, of course, just starts yelling her head off. Then we walk over to his house. She proceeds to tell his mom what we did. And then 5 minutes later, my dad walks into their house. I was really afraid of my dad. So now we're in their kitchen, and his parents and my parents are just staring us down and telling us that what we did was completely wrong. Then my dad starts saying that we need to get married. I can tell Curtis is freaking out. Of course, I'm freaking out too. His parents actually agree that we should get married. Thankfully, my mom was completely against it, and she said absolutely not, they're too young. I literally felt like I was dying. I was obviously grounded for months, couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't do anything, and I obviously didn't speak to Curtis again. Then my mom tells me that Curtis and his family actually moved away. My heart was completely broken. A few years later in college, I contacted him through Facebook. We met up, and we've been together ever since. I knew that our connection back then was super strong, and it is now.
Story time of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. My older sister never really liked me as a child. We were never close. I never knew why, but I was guessing it was because of the 10-year age gap. But I'm pretty sure she hated me because she couldn't even look me in the eye. I cannot make this up. She would not look me in the eye. But she never really talked to my parents either. She kind of just kept to herself all the time. Sometimes I have vivid memories of when we were younger and she would always be arguing with my parents about something, and I always thought it had something to do with me. Well, I was right. It had everything to do with me because eventually my sister turned 18 and she moved out. For 2 years, I didn't talk to her at all. I honestly don't even think I had her number saved, and I'm pretty sure that she didn't have mine. Well, 2 years later, and I was 10 at the time, she reached out to me via social media. I'm not sure how she found my Instagram name, but it was just my name, so she probably just typed that in and found me. She DM'd me and told me that she wanted to talk about something very important and that she would like to talk over the phone. So we exchanged numbers and we called that same night. And she told me that when she was younger, my dad had taken advantage of her and gotten her pregnant and had me. This is part 2 of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. So like I said, my older sister had reached out to me via social media and told me that she was actually my mother. And so after we got off the phone that same night, I lost it at dinner and I went off on my parents and I screamed at them. And I told them that I would go to the police and tell them everything and I would tell them the truth unless they just let me live with my older sister. And they tried to explain themselves, and their reasoning was that they wanted to keep the family together because of their traditional values. And it would have just made their lives a lot harder going through all the court proceedings, so they just kept the family together. And so they clearly didn't want me to go into the police, so they said that I could go live with my older sister. So she came to get me, but she lived in a different state, so it kind of took a while. I still had to stay in the house for like a week or so before she came, but I packed all my stuff and I was ready to go. And when we went back to where she lived, we immediately called the police and told them everything. Fast forward a little bit, they did some DNA testing. My sister's DNA matched as my biological mother's, and then my dad was my biological father, and they saw how the ages just didn't match properly, so they took my father to jail.
This is why waking up late might just save your life. One day when I was in elementary school, my mom and I both overslept, which meant I wouldn't be ready in time to get on the bus. School started at 8, my bus pickup time was at 7, and it was already 6:40 or something. I was still in my PJs and hadn't even had breakfast yet. My mom decided that today we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. It's 6:50, I'm in my PJs eating breakfast, and that's when we hear the bus pull up 10 minutes earlier than scheduled. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closed the door and came back inside, but the bus didn't pull away. There's a knock at the door and my mom opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains he's a substitute bus driver because the regular driver called in sick and that he's early because he wanted to get an early start on the route. My mom says she's taking me to school because we woke up late. He gets visibly upset and says he can wait a few minutes since he's already ahead of schedule. My mom says that we won't be ready in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. Part 2 of why sleeping in might just save your life. After talking to the bus driver, my mom came back looking terrified, but she didn't say anything about it and told me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but my mom would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found out it was being driven by my regular driver and it was full of other kids that are usually on my route. By the way, the other bus was empty. My mom asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. He tells her that he never called in sick and there is no substitute driver on his route. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police and report this incident, which she did without me knowing at the time. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, not even if someone else had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are,
This story was submitted to me by a follower who would like to remain anonymous. When I was 14, I had a best friend named Lucy, and we had one of those friendships where we were really close really quickly, which I now know is a red flag and usually a sign of a toxic friendship. But I was too young to know this then. Our favorite thing to do together was hang out at the mall. Our parents would let us go alone as long as we abided to one rule. We had to stay together at all times, and we were always pretty good good about that. One night we were having a sleepover at Lucy's house and her Uncle Mike came over for dinner. Uncle Mike was pretty loud and goofy. He showed us like 8 magic tricks that night. I liked him, he was fun. But as I was helping clear dishes after dinner, I overheard Mike and Lucy's mom having a hushed conversation in the kitchen. She was like, "You've had too much to drink, why don't you just spend the night?" So Mike ended up sleeping over that night too. Right before going to sleep, Lucy's mom came into the bedroom and she told us to remember to shut the bedroom door before falling asleep. When I asked Lucy why she said that, Lucy just shrugged and said, "I don't know." But we made sure the bedroom door was shut just like she asked. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the feeling of someone tickling my feet. So I was having a sleepover at Lucy's house and I woke up in the middle of the night to someone or something tickling my feet. I scream and then I hear shuffling. Lucy wakes up and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I tell her that something was tickling my feet, but she doesn't believe me. I'm like, "Well, why is the door open? We shut it before we went to sleep." And she goes, "Relax. Sometimes it happens because there's a draft in the house." And I tell her that I think it was her uncle who was tickling my feet and she goes, "Oh, come on, you're hallucinating." And honestly, at the time I had a bad feeling about Lucy's reaction. It felt like she was gaslighting me and I had no idea why. A few weekends later, Lucy and I are chilling at the mall on a Saturday afternoon. My parents let us go to the mall together alone, but their one rule is that we have to stay together the whole time. They call it the buddy system. So that day, Lucy's acting weird. She keeps looking around nervously and checking her phone. She says she has to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, "Okay, I'll go with you." Because we always go together, even if the other person didn't have to pee. And Lucy's like, "No, I'll go alone. I'll be quick." And I'm like, "No, I'll just go with you." And she snaps really aggressively, and she's like, "Just stay here." And then she spins around and sprints away from me. So Lucy's running away from me in the mall. I sprint after her. She's super fast. She rounds a corner and then I can't find her after that. I start crying. I have no idea why my best friend ran away from me. So I sit down on a bench in the mall. I'm still crying, really overwhelmed. Then I hear someone say my name. So I look up and it's Lucy's uncle, Uncle Mike. He asks what's wrong and I tell him. He's being super nice and comforting. And then he starts rubbing my back, which made me uncomfortable, but I don't say anything. Then he offers to give me a ride home. And I say, "No, I can just call my parents." And he goes, "Just let me give you a ride, come on." But the way he said it the second time gave me goosebumps. It was aggressive. Like he wasn't asking me, he was telling me. So I stand up and step away from him and say, "You're making me uncomfortable, I'm calling my parents." Mike glares at me and then he says, "No one likes a tease." And he walks away. I told my parents what happened and they immediately called Lucy's parents. Apparently, Uncle Mike had taken a liking to me. And he found out that I was going to be at the mall that day with Lucy. And Mike paid her $100 to run away and leave me alone with him. He told Lucy that I liked him too and that she was being a good friend by giving us alone time. I never spoke to Lucy again after that.
Story of the time a cop went in my car without my permission. So for a while, I was going to people's houses to do their nails. And I would do this in the summer, so a lot of my clients set up a table outside so that the smell didn't smell up their house too bad. I always feel rude to park in the person's driveway, so I usually park outside of their house on the side of the road. And this time in particular, I did just that, and we did her nails outside as well. At the time, my car had temp plates on it because I had just recently got it. And also, my car is a BMW 2-door with all tinted windows, so you cannot see inside of it, even if you tried. So I could understand why it looks a little bit suspicious. Luckily for me, my nail client's dog ended up running out of the fence into the front yard, right near my car. So I go with her to chase him, and I see the police officer opening up my car door. And I wasn't parked illegally or anything, and my temp plates weren't expired either. So he had no right to be opening up my car doors. So I ran over to my car and I was like, "What's going on? Why are you searching my car?" And he was like, "This is your car?" Part 2 to a cop searching my car without my permission. So I see this police officer opening up my car door and putting his head inside my car. So I'm like, "Excuse me, officer, is there an issue? Why are you searching my car?" And he was like, "Oh, like, is this your car?" And I was like, "Yes, do you have a warrant?" And then he said, "Do you live here?" And I was like, "No, but do you have a warrant?" And then he said, "No, actually, the neighbor called me because he was concerned, and I actually live down the street, and the car was unfamiliar, so I felt the need to search it. I can't see inside of your car because of the tint, so I didn't know if somebody was in there, like maybe sleeping in their car or something." I don't really remember what he said, but I was like, "Okay, but I think you need a warrant to search the car. Please close my door." And honestly, he was pretty nice about it, I'm not gonna lie. I was just really annoyed because in my head, I'm thinking like, why? Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm always getting caught up for doing nothing.